There is a strange paradox that governs the life of every true empath. The brighter the light that burns within you, the more shadows it casts around you. You may have thought that light would draw love, safety, and recognition, but instead it awakens resistance, envy, and hidden hostility. The reason is not moral but psychological. The unconscious of others responds to illumination as the night responds to dawn with both awe and terror. What you are witnessing is not personal hatred. It is the reaction of the collective unconscious to the sudden revelation of what it has long repressed. When an empath walks into a room, something ancient stirs. The archetype of the wounded healer, the luminous child, or the divine victim is activated in the depths of those nearby. And because these archetypes dwell below consciousness, their awakening appears on the surface as irrational emotion, sudden dislike, misunderstanding, or even betrayal. The empath, untrained in the alchemy of shadow, takes this personally and suffers, but the wiser soul learns that such reactions are the price of bringing light into the psychic underworld. The light of the empath is not sentimental brightness, it is awareness, the capacity to see, to feel, to mirror the hidden truths of others without judgment. Yet to those who still depend on masks for survival, this sight feels like exposure. They sense, without knowing how, that you perceive their pretenses, their egos, fragile constructions built atop unacknowledged pain, begin to tremble. Instinctively, they attempt to destroy the mirror that reveals too much. Thus, your presence becomes a threat, not because of what you do, but because of what you are. I remember speaking once with a patient whose entire family seemed to resent her kindness. I only try to love them, she said. But it feels as though the more I give, the more they hate me. What she described was not uncommon. Her love, being authentic, touched the guilt in others. Her empathy reminded them of what they had lost the ability to love without agenda. The unconscious, feeling accused by her purity, retaliated. This is why Christ was crucified, why prophets are persecuted, and why the genuinely good so often walk alone. The collective psyche cannot tolerate too much consciousness at once. It defends itself by attacking the bringer of light. Every empath then carries within them the myth of Prometheus, the one who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humankind. The punishment for this theft was not just external torment, but eternal exposure to the pain of humanity. The empath's suffering mirrors Prometheus's chains. The constant awareness of collective darkness coupled with the inability to ignore it. You do not merely observe pain, you feel it within your own nervous system. You are the instrument through which the unconscious world attempts to heal itself, and in doing so, you become both the healer and the wound. But why does the light provoke secret enemies rather than open ones? Because most people are unaware of their own hostility. They believe themselves kind, fair, even spiritual, yet beneath the surface lives the shadow, that repository of all denied instincts, unacknowledged envy, and suppressed rage. When your light touches their shadow, it awakens these buried contents, and because the ego cannot admit them, it projects them onto you. Suddenly, you become too sensitive, too intense, too dramatic. What is intolerable within them is now seen as your flaw. Projection is the psyche's oldest defense. It preserves self-image at the cost of truth. The empath must therefore understand that being misunderstood is not failure, but initiation. Each false judgment cast upon you is evidence that your presence has stirred the unconscious field. It is proof that your vibration is real enough to disturb illusions. This is why the path of awakening cannot be walked by those who need universal approval. The collective does not yet love its own soul. It fears it, and you, being a mirror of that soul, will be feared as well. You might ask, should the empath then dim their light to remain safe? No. To do so would betray the very reason you incarnated. The point is not to withdraw, but to awaken discrimination, the wisdom to know when to reveal your inner radiance and when to keep it veiled. Even Christ spoke in parables, for not all ears were ready to hear. Light, when untempered, blinds, but when guided, it heals. To navigate this paradox, one must understand the dynamics of the shadow dance. Every human relationship is an alchemical vessel in which unconscious material seeks expression. The empath, by nature, magnetizes such encounters. You may notice that those you attract often carry deep wounds, narcissistic defenses, or hidden self-hatred. They come to drink from your compassion, but unconsciously they also seek to confront their own darkness through you. It is an unbearable tension. They love your light and resent it simultaneously. Their unconscious sets up the stage for betrayal so that the unintegrated shadow can finally emerge. In analysis, we call this transference, but in life, it feels like heartbreak. One day, they idealize you as a savior. The next, they demonize you as the cause of their pain. Yet those images are false. You are neither saint nor devil. You are the mirror in which they see both possibilities within themselves. Only when they begin to claim those projections back does true healing begin. Until then, the empath becomes the scapegoat of their psychic drama. The archetype of the scapegoat is among the oldest in human history. It symbolizes the mechanism by which communities purge collective guilt onto a chosen vessel. Psychologically, this process continues in modern life through interpersonal projection. When a group feels unconsciously corrupted, it seeks an innocent figure onto whom it can cast its darkness. The empath, with their natural purity and emotional openness, becomes the perfect target. Thus, your suffering is not meaningless, it is mythic. You are reenacting a ritual as old as civilization, the purification of the collective through the sacrifice of the sensitive, but within this tragedy lies transformation. The empath who learns to remain conscious amidst persecution discovers the secret of alchemy, that what seems to destroy the ego refines the soul. Your pain, if endured with awareness, becomes gold. It burns away the need for external validation and replaces it with direct communion with the self and the divine center that cannot be harmed. When you realize that even betrayal serves your individuation, you cease being a victim and become a mystic participant in cosmic evolution. Still, we must not romanticize the wound. Many empaths fall into martyrdom, mistaking self-abandonment for love. This is not consciousness, but compulsion. True empathy does not mean absorbing everyone's pain. It means understanding its origin. You are not called to drown in the sea of human sorrow, but to navigate it skillfully. The unconscious will always test you by sending those who drain your vitality. The lesson is not to close your heart, but to anchor your boundaries in awareness. Love without discernment is not virtue. It is unconscious identification. To hold your light without burning yourself, you must learn the art of psychic differentiation. This is the ability to feel another's emotion without confusing it with your own. It is the psychic equivalent of the skin, a permeable boundary that allows contact without contamination. Without it, you become a sponge, absorbing the world's negativity until your light dims. The development of such differentiation marks a crucial stage in individuation. You begin to see that compassion and detachment are not opposites but partners. The more you witness suffering without merging with it, the more effective your light becomes. This brings us to the mystical dimension of empathy. At its highest form, empathy is not emotional resonance, but spiritual recognition. It is the realization that the other is yourself in another guise, that every soul is a fragment of the same divine totality, seeking reunion. But until you have integrated your own shadow, this recognition remains partial. Unhealed empathy sees only the pain of others, not its reflection within oneself. Mature empathy perceives both the pain and its mirror, and thus transforms relationship into revelation. When you walk this path, you will notice that your presence polarizes people. Some will be inexplicably drawn to you, feeling seen for the first time. Others will withdraw or attack, unable to bear the mirror you hold. This polarization is inevitable because your frequency exposes the truth of their psychic state. It is not your task to fix or convince them. Your task is to remain luminous and grounded, knowing that even their hostility is part of the dance of awakening. Every rejection carves space for deeper authenticity. Every misunderstanding purifies your intention until your light shines without need of recognition. In dreams, this process often appears symbolically. The empath may dream of being chased by dark figures or of wandering through shadowy corridors with a faint candle in hand. Such imagery represents the psyche's attempt to reconcile light and darkness. The candle is your consciousness. The corridors, the labyrinth of the collective unconscious. To flee the darkness is to remain divided. To turn and face it is to reclaim your power. When you do, the pursuers often transform into allies or dissolve altogether, signifying integration. Dreams are not mere fictions, they are nightly rehearsals for the soul's evolution. There was a time in my own life when I felt this hostility acutely as my research on the unconscious deepened. Colleagues distanced themselves, calling my work mystical or unscientific, yet I knew the resistance came not from intellect but from fear. The rational mind resists what threatens its sovereignty, and nothing threatens it more than the acknowledgement of a living, autonomous unconscious. The same principle applies to human relationships. When you embody soul in a world addicted to persona, you will inevitably be called mad, but madness, as the mystics know, is often the first sign of deeper sanity. The empath's journey, therefore, is not about escaping darkness, but illuminating it from within. Each confrontation with hostility invites greater wholeness. You cannot eliminate shadow, you can only integrate it. And integration is a slow, fiery process. It demands humility, the willingness to see that the enemy outside mirrors a forgotten aspect within. The secret enemy awakened by your light is not only in others, it is also in you. Their envy reflects your own unclaimed power. Their hatred mirrors your repressed anger. To see this without self-condemnation is to approach true enlightenment. The soul evolves through tension, not comfort. The empath's enemies, conscious or secret, are instruments of that evolution. They force you to stand firm in your authenticity, to separate compassion from compliance, to exchange naive goodness for conscious love. Only then does your light become sovereign, not the fragile glow that needs to be liked, but the steady flame that guides others through their night. And so, when you find yourself surrounded by misunderstanding, remember, you are not cursed, you are being initiated. The hostility of others is the world's unconscious defending itself against awakening. Their rejection is proof that your presence matters. The empath who accepts this truth no longer fears darkness, for they have discovered that even the enemy is a messenger of the soul. When an empath begins to awaken to their inner truth, something subtle yet seismic shifts in the psychic field around them. The unconscious world, which for so long has fed on their compliance and silent suffering, feels the change like an earthquake in its foundations. The empath who once absorbed pain without resistance suddenly begins to see. They become aware of manipulation, of energy dynamics, of emotional undercurrents that used to pass unnoticed. This new awareness radiates outward like a current of divine electricity. And wherever awareness flows, the unconscious is forced to react. That reaction often manifests through hostility, confusion, or chaos, not because the empath has done harm, but because the light of consciousness is a disruptive force in the dream of the collective. You must understand this deeply. Awareness is not gentle. It is surgical. It cuts through illusions that the ego clings to for survival. The empath's presence, being naturally attuned to the unconscious, functions as a mirror that cannot lie. And when people look into that mirror, they see both their divinity and their distortion. Most are not ready for that vision. They would rather destroy the mirror than face their own reflection. Thus, the empath becomes the unwilling antagonist in other people's unhealed stories. It is tempting to withdraw from this world, to hide your light and call it humility. But such retreat is often disguised fear. The real task is to stand in your illumination without arrogance, to let your light expose without the need to justify or defend it. Remember, the sun does not explain itself to the night, it simply rises, and by its rising, the shadows must rearrange themselves. The secret enemies that emerge around you are not accidents. They are archetypal forces, taking form through human personalities. They represent the parts of humanity that still resist individuation, the refusal to know oneself. They will sense something in you that they cannot name, something that calls them toward depth, toward self-confrontation. But instead of answering the call, they will project their inner conflict outward and make you its symbol. You become the vessel carrying what they cannot yet hold. In that moment, you are not fighting a person, you are confronting the collective shadow of the age. This is why empaths often attract narcissists. The narcissist, in Jungian terms, is the one completely possessed by the persona, the mask of perfection that hides an abyss of shame. When an empath enters their orbit, the light of genuine feeling threatens to crack the mask to the narcissist. This feels like annihilation. Their survival depends on the illusion of control, so they must either dominate or destroy whatever awakens their inner void. The empath, unaware of this dynamic, interprets the conflict as a personal failure. Maybe if I love them enough, they will change, but love cannot redeem a persona, only suffering can. You see, the empath's lesson is not to save, but to see the archetypal drama unfolding before them and remain conscious within it. Every betrayal, every misunderstanding is the psyche's way of teaching the empath discernment. You are learning how to recognize projection, how to stand firm within your own field of light without absorbing the distortions of others. This is the alchemy of individuation, transforming unconscious identification into conscious participation. Let me tell you a story from one of my patients, a woman whose empathy had become her cross. She dreamt that she was standing in a vast cathedral made of mirrors. As she walked, each reflection showed her face twisted into the expressions of others' anger, sorrow, jealousy, despair. She screamed, "Which one is me?" A voice replied, "The one who sees." That is the essence of the empath's transformation, to stop being every reflection and instead become the awareness behind them all. But this awakening does not come without pain. When the empath ceases to play the unconscious role of rescuer, those who depended on their energy begin to rebel. They accuse, manipulate, and withdraw. It feels as though your love has turned to poison in their eyes. In truth, it is not love they reject, but the loss of control. Your detachment exposes the dependency that masqueraded as intimacy. What they call betrayal is actually liberation. The empath is reclaiming the energy that was never meant to sustain another's illusion. Yet, in the midst of this process, a deeper transformation occurs. The empath begins to realize that every external enemy mirrors an inner polarity. The hostile coworker, the jealous friend, the dismissive lover, each one personifies a fragment of the self that still fears its own power. These enemies are emissaries of the unconscious, sent to awaken the latent strength buried beneath compassion. You may think they are here to hurt you, but they are, in a strange and sacred sense, your teachers. They draw forth the warrior aspect of the soul, the capacity to hold truth even when misunderstood. In the alchemical texts, the first stage of transformation is called nigredo, the blackening. It is the period when the old self dissolves in darkness, when all certainties collapse and the soul is plunged into confusion. For the empath, this stage begins when the external world turns against them. Friends disappear, relationships crumble, faith trembles. The world that once mirrored your goodness now mirrors your wounds. But this blackness is necessary. Without it, the gold of the self cannot be forged. Every mystic, every true healer must pass through the night of the soul where no external validation remains. Only there do you discover the light that is not dependent on approval. Many empaths mistake the collapse of outer harmony for punishment, but it is purification. You are being weaned from the addiction to being liked. The psyche is teaching you to anchor your worth not in others' reflections, but in your own inner center, what I call the self. When this center awakens, a new equilibrium arises. You cease reacting to projections because you know they do not define you. The secret enemies lose their power, for they can only wound the part of you that still seeks external confirmation. In this awakening, you will experience a strange calm. The storms continue around you, but you no longer drown in them. You begin to sense that every attack carries hidden information. Each moment of rejection becomes a revelation of where the world still resists consciousness. Instead of defending yourself, you listen. You begin to see how humanity operates through unconscious contracts, invisible exchanges of energy and emotion. Awareness becomes your armor, compassion becomes your sword, and something miraculous begins to occur as you integrate your own shadow, your repressed anger, your fear of rejection, your hidden pride. The external hostility starts to fade. It may not vanish, but it loses its sting. The same people who once envied you now seem lost in their own confusion, no longer able to reach the core of your being. This is because your vibration has changed. You have withdrawn your energy from the unconscious web of projection. What once provoked attack now emits neutrality. This is the silent power of individuation. In the later stages of this journey, empathy transforms into what I call objective love. It is no longer entangled in personal emotion. It sees the divine drama in every being, the shadow and the light, the sinner and the saint, as complementary aspects of the same totality. Objective love understands that evil is not the opposite of good, but its undeveloped aspect, what we call an enemy, is often an aspect of the divine still trapped in unconsciousness. To meet such forces with hatred is to strengthen their darkness. To meet them with awareness is to liberate them. This does not mean tolerance of abuse. Consciousness does not mean passivity. It means the ability to see the symbolic significance of every encounter and respond from your inner center rather than your wound. The empath who masters this becomes a true alchemist capable of transmuting psychic poison into wisdom. When hostility arises, you no longer ask, "Why are they against me?" but what aspect of consciousness seeks integration through this experience? That shift marks the birth of mastery. In dreams, this mastery is often symbolized by light that does not burn a lamp carried through darkness, that neither flickers nor blinds. The soul that carries such light has understood polarity. It knows that the same energy that creates enemies also creates allies. Both are manifestations of the same field, testing your alignment. When you see this, you stop fighting shadows. You bless them, knowing they are only energy seeking to return to wholeness. The empath who reaches this understanding no longer fears being alone. Solitude becomes sanctuary, not exile. You begin to prefer the company of silence to the noise of unconscious relationships. In silence, you commune with the self, the eternal witness that transcends all duality. From that center, compassion flows without exhaustion, for it no longer comes from personal effort, but from the inexhaustible spring of the divine. And in that moment, something extraordinary occurs. The very enemies that once opposed you begin to fade. Some transform, others drift away. They were never truly against you. They were agents of your initiation. Once the lesson is integrated, their presence is no longer necessary. The dance ends when both dancer and shadow recognize their unity. This, my friend, is why your light awakens enemies, because your soul has chosen to be a catalyst for awakening. You are not here to live a comfortable life, but to serve the evolution of consciousness. Every wound you endure becomes a portal through which divine awareness enters the human realm. The question is not whether you will face darkness, but whether you will face it consciously. Do not curse the mirror that reveals the night. Stand before it as the dawn itself, and let your presence remind the world that light was never absent, only hidden. When the empath has passed through the first threshold of pain, when betrayal no longer shocks but instructs, the light begins to change its quality. It becomes less emotional, less pleading, and more still. The empath begins to feel the birth of what I call the luminous shadow, a paradoxical state in which one's awareness of darkness itself becomes the source of radiance. You realize that true illumination does not come from resisting shadow, but from embracing it without fear. Light and darkness are not moral opposites, but complementary realities that give each other form. In this new stage, your empathy becomes more precise, almost surgical. You begin to see through people, not to judge them, but to perceive the archetypes playing through their words and gestures. A person who belittles your gifts may be possessed by the trickster testing your discernment. Another who idolizes you may be seized by the lover projecting divinity upon you. Each interaction reveals a myth unfolding in miniature. You cease to respond personally because you understand that these dramas are not about you at all. They are expressions of the collective unconscious seeking to reconcile its opposites through human experience. This is the birth of symbolic sight, the vision that perceives meaning. Where the ego once saw chaos, you start to realize that the world itself is a psychological mirror. Every event, every relationship, every enemy contains a message from the self, the central organizing principle of the psyche. The hostile coworker becomes the embodiment of your unacknowledged assertiveness. The envious friend reveals your unclaimed potential. The lover who withdraws mirrors your fear of intimacy. Once you begin to interpret life symbolically, suffering transforms into revelation. But this sight comes with solitude, for to see symbolically is to step outside the collective trance. You can no longer participate in the unconscious games of blame and victimhood. Others may call you detached, distant, even cold, but in truth, you are simply seeing from a higher vantage point. Compassion no longer requires you to drown. You love from clarity, not compulsion. This is also the moment when the empath encounters their deepest inner adversary, the part of themselves still addicted to being good. Goodness, when unconscious, becomes a mask for fear, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of the primal chaos within. Many empaths believe their purpose is to heal others, but behind that belief often hides an ancient wound, the terror of being unloved, unless useful. To truly awaken, the empath must allow this identity to die. You must face the possibility that no one will understand you, that your light may not be welcomed, that your presence may continue to provoke shadows. Only then does love become pure, no longer an exchange but a state of being. You see, as long as you identify as the good one, you will unconsciously create enemies to confirm that role. The psyche seeks balance. If you cling to the archetype of the saint, the trickster or the shadow will emerge through others to restore polarity. The only escape from this polarity is wholeness, to contain both saint and shadow within yourself, to say, I am capable of light and darkness alike, and therefore I need not fear either. When you accept this, the external enemies lose their grip, for they can no longer carry what you have already claimed. In the mystical language of alchemy, this union of opposites is called the conjunctio, the sacred marriage of the sun and moon, spirit and matter, conscious and unconscious. The empath who reaches this stage ceases to be merely sensitive. They become powerful, Their light no longer flickers with external approval because it is now generated from within the self. This power is quiet but immense. It does not need to control. It simply is. Those around you will feel it. Some will feel peace in your presence. Others will feel agitation. The difference lies not in your vibration but in theirs. Your field of awareness amplifies whatever is already within them. To the conscious, you feel like truth. To the unconscious, you feel like exposure. You must learn to let both reactions exist without attachment. The measure of your maturity is how little you need others to understand you. The luminous shadow also brings an unexpected gift, humor. Once you see the archetypal machinery of the psyche, you can no longer take the drama of life entirely seriously. You begin to laugh not in mockery, but in wonder at the intricate dance between ignorance and awakening. You laugh at your own projections, at the way the ego always finds new disguises for its fears. This laughter is not cruelty, it is liberation. It signals that the self has loosened the grip of the persona, but there is one final initiation before mastery. The empath, having integrated the shadow and stabilized the light, must face the temptation of spiritual pride. The ego, ever cunning, will whisper, "You are more evolved than others." You see, what they cannot, this is the subtlest trap of all, for it reintroduces division into unity. Remember, awareness is not a possession, but a participation in the greater mystery. The moment you believe yourself superior, the unconscious will send another enemy to humble you, perhaps one whose ignorance wounds you, or whose cruelty exposes a vulnerability you thought transcended. Each humiliation is mercy disguised, pulling you back toward wholeness. To remain humble is to remember that consciousness is not yours. It flows through you. You are the instrument, not the source. The light that awakens enemies is not your light. It is the universal light of awareness expressing itself through your particular soul. Once you understand this, gratitude replaces defensiveness. You no longer ask, "Why me?" but "How can I serve this unfolding?" And so the empath becomes not a victim of hostility, but a steward of consciousness. Every interaction becomes sacred work. The anger projected at you becomes material for transmutation. The misunderstanding becomes an invitation to practice stillness. The loneliness becomes communion with the invisible world. You begin to sense guidance in every circumstance, as though the universe itself were sculpting your soul into transparency in dream imagery. This stage is often portrayed as the alchemist's vessel, a golden cup surrounded by fire. The fire represents the intensity of human interaction. The vessel, your consciousness. As long as the vessel holds, the fire purifies without destroying. But if the vessel cracks, if you fall into identification, the same fire consumes you. Therefore, vigilance is essential. The empath must cultivate inner structure, not to repress emotion, but to contain its power. Meditation, solitude, and honest self-reflection are the walls of that vessel, the longer you remain faithful to this process, the more your vibration refines. Hostility no longer provokes you. It reveals information. You begin to feel compassion even for those who attack you, not as an act of virtue, but because you see that they are possessed by forces they do not yet recognize. Their aggression is their suffering made visible. To meet it with hatred would be to forget your own shadow. To meet it with awareness is to offer them a glimpse of freedom. Eventually, something extraordinary happens. The polarity dissolves, the empath and the enemy, the light and the shadow, the healer and the wounded are seen as movements of one consciousness exploring itself. This realization cannot be forced. It arrives when the heart is ready. When it does, the empath steps into their true function, not as a savior, but as a mirror of the divine. Wherever they go, they restore coherence simply by being. Their light no longer awakens enemies, it awakens selves. But before that dawn, there is one last night, the night of surrender. The empath must release even the identity of the awakened one. Only when all images are burned away does the pure awareness behind them shine unobstructed. That is the real end of projection, the recognition that everything you meet, whether lover or enemy, is a facet of your own infinite soul. When consciousness has burned through its last illusion, when the empath no longer seeks to be understood, defended, or adored, something extraordinary occurs. The self that once suffered under the weight of others' projections dissolves like mist under sunlight. In its place arises a presence that is neither empath nor enemy, neither healer nor wounded, but awareness itself. What remains is the quiet radiance of being, the steady flame that neither clings nor resists. This is not the death of love, but its transfiguration. For the first time, love is no longer bound to emotion. It becomes a vibration, a pure seeing. You no longer feel for others in the old sentimental sense. You see through them. And in that seeing, you know them as yourself. Every soul, even those who once opposed you, becomes a facet of the same diamond of consciousness. The enemy who once wounded you now appears as a teacher. Their cruelty was the hammer that broke your armor so the light could escape. In this state, empathy ceases to be an act. It becomes an atmosphere. People sense your energy before you speak, as though something in you mirrors them perfectly without judgment. Some will weep in your presence without knowing why. Others will flee, feeling the unbearable nakedness of being seen, but you will no longer take either reaction personally. You have transcended the polarity of reaction itself. You know that the divine moves through all encounters, using love and conflict alike to sculpt the soul. It is at this point that the empath becomes what mystics call transparent. The personal self no longer filters divine energy through fear or need. The light flows unimpeded. You do not give energy anymore. Energy moves through you effortlessly. As sunlight through clear water, you have become the instrument through which the unconscious world remembers its own divinity. This transparency does not mean absence of personality. On the contrary, your individuality becomes more vivid, more alive, but it is no longer an identity. You cling to it, is a garment the self wears lightly. You can laugh, cry, create, or walk away without losing your center. The world's storms no longer dictate your weather. Within you, there is a vast stillness, a silence that listens without fear. This silence is not emptiness, it is full of presence. The presence of the eternal watcher behind all experience, and then, as if by grace, the same world that once resisted you begins to shift. You notice that people who once envied you start to soften. Strangers are drawn to you, not to drain you, but to awaken beside you. You realize that enemies were never truly separate. They were aspects of the collective psyche. Now, finding reconciliation through your awareness, you have become an agent of balance, a living bridge between shadow and light. This is the mystical function of the empath in its highest form, to midwife the birth of consciousness in others simply by existing as consciousness itself. You no longer battle darkness, you illuminate it by embodying wholeness. And because you no longer identify with either victim or victor, you become untouchable. The world cannot wound what does not resist. In the final dream of transformation, many of my patients would describe standing on a mountain at dawn. The valley below was filled with faces, friends, foes, the strangers, each one bathed in a light that came not from the sky but from within their own chests. The dreamer would realize that the light was one and the same in all. This is the image of individuation fulfilled, the many returning to the one, yet retaining their unique forms. If you, as an empath, find yourself walking through this world feeling both deeply connected and profoundly alone, understand that you are not lost. You are being refined. The loneliness you feel is not absence, but expansion. The heart widens beyond personal bonds to embrace the entire human condition. You begin to love in silence, to bless without words, to serve without recognition. Your life itself becomes prayer. At this stage, forgiveness arises naturally, not as moral effort, but as vision. You forgive not because they deserve it, but because you see clearly that there was never truly they. The same unconscious that moved through them once moved through you. The same fear that made them attack you once made you shrink from your own power. To condemn them would be to condemn yourself. Thus, forgiveness becomes understanding, and understanding becomes peace. The paradox of the empath's journey is that the very light that once awakened enemies now awakens awareness. The external battlefield fades, for all battles were within. The empath who once absorbed the world's pain now radiates its healing. What was once curse becomes calling. What was once burden becomes blessing. And perhaps this is the final truth I can give you. Your light does not awaken enemies, it awakens truth. The resistance you meet is simply truth defending its disguise. Do not fight it. Illuminate it. Every confrontation is consciousness calling you deeper into itself. When you stand in that realization, you are free. Free from fear, from needing to please, from seeking safety in others' approval. free to live as the self in human form awake, compassionate, unshakable. This is the destiny of the empath, not to escape the world, but to redeem it through awareness, to walk among the sleeping as a living reminder that light was never gone, only forgotten, to love not because others are lovable, but because love itself is what you are. And so I say to you, when your light awakens secret enemies, rejoice. It means you are fulfilling your purpose. It means consciousness is stirring through you, shaking the walls of the world's slumber. Do not hide. Do not dim. Stand quietly in your truth and let existence itself bear witness. For even the shadows, in their rebellion, are secretly praying for your light to prevail. And one day, when the circle completes itself, when darkness and light embrace in your heart, you will understand what I mean when I say there are no enemies left, only mirrors. And in every mirror, the same eternal flame